WNBA are not going to be happy with this. That's all I'm going to say. They are absolutely positively not going to be happy with this right here. If you guys don't know, obviously Caitlin Clark is what you call it. She's going to be in the WNBA as part of a
Watch the reaction again, not the clip, not the quote, not the headline. Watch the body language, because that's where the truth leaks out. That tight smile, that awkward pause, that forced attempt to sound balanced when balance is the last thing they're feeling. That wasn't excitement. That was panic. That was the sound of a league realizing it just lost control of the narrative it has spent years trying to micromanage. Because in one sentence, one unscripted, unfiltered, brutally honest sentence, NBC didn't just compliment Caitlin Clark, they detonated the WNBA's entire messaging strategy. When a top NBC executive casually states that there is no more iconic figure in basketball right now, not women's basketball period, that isn't hype, it isn't fandom, it isn't social media exaggeration. That is a boardroom conclusion. That is a data-backed verdict. That is what happens when ratings sheets, engagement curves, sponsor interest, ticket demand, and cultural relevance all point in the same direction so clearly that pretending otherwise becomes impossible. And this is exactly why the reaction was frustration instead of celebration. Because the WNBA didn't want this said out loud. Not like this. Not this clearly. Not on an NBA platform. Not by a broadcast partner who actually has access to the real numbers. This should have been the greatest moment in league history. A WNBA player being publicly positioned, by a major NBA rights holder, as the most relevant figure in the entire sport. That's the dream scenario leagues spend decades chasing. That's the crossover validation that turns niche relevance into mainstream permanence. That's how women's sports break ceilings instead of tapping them politely. But instead of popping champagne, the league stiffened up, because this moment exposes a contradiction they've been trying to hide. For years, the WNBA has preached collective equality as its guiding principle, no single star above the league, no individual bigger than the shield, no hierarchy of importance. On paper, it sounds noble. In practice, it collides violently with how professional sports actually function. Sports don't grow because everyone is treated the same. They grow because fans emotionally attach themselves to someone. A face. A name. A story. A villain. A hero. A lightning rod. And Caitlin Clark is not just another great player in that ecosystem, she is the ecosystem's gravitational center right now. The numbers aren't subtle. They're not debatable. They're not interpretive. When she plays, people watch. When she doesn't, they don't. That's not disrespectful to anyone else, that's just reality. NBC didn't invent this reality. They acknowledged it. And that's why this moment hit differently. This wasn't a YouTuber chasing clicks or a fan account stirring drama. This was a network executive whose job depends on accurately identifying what drives viewership. NBC is not sentimental about basketball. They're not ideological. They are transactional. They follow eyeballs, money, and momentum. When they elevate Caitlin Clark on an NBA show and describe her as the most iconic figure in the sport, they are speaking the language of advertisers, not activists. They're telling sponsors where the attention is flowing. They're telling executives where the leverage lives. They're telling the industry who currently moves culture. And that assessment directly contradicts the official tone the WNBA has spent the past year trying to enforce. Remember how this season was framed by the league itself. Remember the statements. Remember the press releases. When attendance and ratings spiked, the messaging wasn't this generational rookie changed the landscape. It was our league is growing collectively. When playoffs hit, the credit wasn't assigned to the most watched player in women's basketball history, it was redistributed carefully, deliberately, almost defensively. At one point, the league went out of its way to credit Alyssa Thomas And that wasn't accidental. That was ideological. That was the league choosing principle over perception. The problem is, perception is the business. You don't get to tell fans why they showed up. Fans tell you. With their time. With their clicks. With their money. This is where the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. NBC has access to granular data the league cannot spin away. Minute-by-minute ratings. Segment retention. Social amplification. Sponsor performance. They know exactly what happens to a broadcast when Caitlin Clark is involved and exactly what happens when she isn't. And based on that data, they made a statement the WNBA has been actively avoiding. She is not just part of the story, she is the story. Right now. Across the entire sport. And once that's said publicly by a partner who also carries NBA games, the conversation changes. Because now Clark isn't being compared to other WNBA players. She's being placed in the same relevance tier as LeBron James and Steph Curry, and NBC is saying she's winning that battle in the current moment. That's seismic. That's uncomfortable. That's destabilizing if your league philosophy depends on flattening stars instead of elevating them. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. The resistance to Caitlin Clark's dominance isn't about basketball. It's about control. It's about fear of what happens when the league no longer gets to dictate the narrative and the market decides for itself. Clark didn't ask to be bigger than the league's messaging strategy. She didn't campaign for preferential treatment. She just showed up, played at an elite level, broke records, and captured the public's imagination in a way that can't be manufactured or evenly distributed by committee. That kind of stardom is inconvenient for systems built on forced parity. It exposes the fiction that all impact is equal. It reveals that some players don't just participate in growth, they cause it. In any other league, this wouldn't even be controversial. The NBA didn't pretend Michael Jordan was just one of many. The NFL doesn't act like Patrick Mahomes is interchangeable with the average quarterback. They lean into their stars aggressively because stars don't diminish leagues, they define them. They create entry points for casual fans. They give media something to center stories around. They give sponsors a reason to invest emotionally, not just contractually. The WNBA finally has that figure at a scale it has never experienced before, and instead of sprinting toward the opportunity, it hesitates, worried about who might feel overlooked. That hesitation is costly. Windows like this don't stay open forever. Cultural relevance is not patient. NBC understands that urgency. That's why they're already integrating Clark into NBA programming. That's future-proofing. That's brand insurance. That's recognizing that even if the WNBA stumbles through CBA disputes, lockouts, or internal conflicts, the Clark connection must be preserved. Because if she disappears from the American sports conversation for a year, the momentum doesn't pause, it evaporates. Accessibility matters. Visibility matters. Timing matters. NBC is making sure Caitlin Clark remains present, discussed, familiar, and central regardless of what the league decides to do. And the most damning part of all this is what it implies. A broadcast partner values her individual relevance more clearly, more confidently, and more aggressively than the league she plays for. That's the real tension. Not whether the quote was too bold. Not whether it disrespected other players. The tension is that the WNBA is still trying to win an ideological argument about